really, 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 really long way from a mainland source or from a different island. The thing is that most of these things that got here, these events where they dispersed to Hawaii, were so rare. Were really like a 1 in a million year type event, that the things that we have here are very rare. They've since evolved to become very unique species. It's not like there's a lot of gene flow between mainland populations of plants and Hawaii populations of plants. You get here, you somehow survive, and you become your own species. For that reason, many of the plants and animals that we find here in Hawaii are endemic, meaning we find them here and nowhere else. One thing that biogeographers and botanists and zoologists like to measure to figure out how unique and interesting a place is by looking at the ratio of things that are endemic to things that are indigenous or native. And if you're used to different definitions of some of these words, this might not quite jive with you. Endemic means something that's found here in one location and nowhere else. So organisms can be endemic to a hill or a valley. They can be endemic to an island, or they can be endemic to the Hawaiian archipelago, meaning they're found in that one place, however you define that one place, but nowhere else on Earth. Conversely, things that are native are things that got here on their own, without human intervention. Things that floated here, things that flew here, things that made it on their own, without people. Those are native things. So by definition, everything that's endemic is also native, right? Because if it's endemic, it got here on its own a long time ago and evolved into something else. But we're going to draw this distinction. Things that are native are things that are here, but are also found elsewhere, on other Pacific islands maybe, or on the coast of California, or in the coast of Japan. And things that are endemic are things that are only found here. By looking at that ratio of all of your native things, what percentage of those are endemic, this gives you a pretty good indication of how unique a place is and how frequent you find dispersal from mainland sources. So let's take a look at our Hawaiian flora and see how we're doing. This is a chart that it's constantly updated and tweaked, but this is more or less correct. These numbers haven't changed much in the past 20 or 30 years. And this is looking at that ratio of things that are endemic to things that are native. So in this column, you find things that are endemic, found here and only here. Native, things that are found here, but also everywhere else, or some places else. And this is that ratio out of 100%. What proportion are endemic? So let's start going down the list. Ferns have a pretty high rate of endemism. So about 70% of our native ferns here in Hawaii are only found in Hawaii and nowhere else. That's pretty good, right? I mean, that's an impressive number. For comparison, if you looked at the rates of endemism among ferns in California, the rate's about 60%. So we have California beat, at least. But it's not as high as some of these other numbers that we're going to look at in just a second. So let's talk about ferns. This is a fern. This is one of our endemic ferns. This is our tree fern. It's a pretty. This one's big. How do you think it got here? How did ferns make it to Hawaii?
Or wind.
Yeah, wind, I heard. Spores, I heard. Both of those are correct. Yeah?
You said endemic is only found here and nowhere else.
Correct.
Okay,
Only found here and nowhere else. This is how ferns reproduce. On the bottom side of their leaves, they have these sporangia that send out little propagules that are gametes that are the size of maybe a speck of dust. Right? Each one of these sporangia contains, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of these spores. And ferns produce a ton of them, right? They get up into the air. Most of them probably land within a few feet of that fern. Every once in a while, there's a big gust of wind. They blow up into the air. They maybe get up into the stratosphere, into the jet stream, and they float around. But it doesn't happen all that frequently. But it has that potential, right? That these things can get airborne and fly around. Ferns and things that have spores are not unique in being wind dispersed. We also have some examples of plants, true angiosperms, flowering plants that produce seeds that are also airborne and wind dispersed. A good example is our ohia trees, right? This is our beautiful ohia or Metrosideros polymorpha. past the glass blowing studio on your way here? How many of you guys walked that way from the mall? You know, on your right-hand side, there's those big things that look like acorns. You know what those are? They're ohia capsules. So they're ohia capsules that have been rendered in bronze, I think. They're actually much smaller. Inside one of those little acorns or capsules, again, is thousands of little ohia seeds that are like dust, and you can blow them in your hand and they'll spray all over the place. This is what they look like, and you can tell it's just brimming with these seeds that are readily dispersed via the air. It turns out, though, as airborne and ready to fly as these seeds are, it doesn't actually happen all that often. Most of our ferns come from one place on Earth. Does anybody know where that one place is? The origins of all of our ferns here in Hawaii. Turns out that almost all of our ferns come from Asia. They come from the east. They come from way over in the east. We don't get California ferns here. We don't get South American ferns. We get a lot of Asian ferns. And this is also pretty characteristic of most of things that make it to Hawaii in the air. And the reason is the jet stream. We're going to talk a little bit about wind patterns in a couple of lectures when we talk about climate in Hawaii. But if you remember that the Earth is turning this way, like that, most of the wind is sort of contained at the surface of the Earth and so follows it. So it's not like we're walking through a big windstorm every day. But if you go up high enough, you find that there's a jet stream, that air is moving counter current to the way that the Earth is rotating. And this is howling winds that can be really strong. So about 80% of our ferns came from Asia, and probably through the jet stream. Now this isn't just conjecture based on biogeography. This is something that we can actually measure, and people have actually done this. So in the 1960s, people took airplanes way up above the surface of the Earth into the jet stream, and they deployed big nets to see what they could catch in their nets. They took their nets back, and they started looking through them in the microscope, and they found all sorts of stuff that was flying around in this jet stream. They found plenty of plants, right? Plenty of fern spores, plenty of small seeded things like orchid seeds and ohia seeds. They also found a lot of insects, so live spiders were up in the jet stream flying around. Can you imagine how freaked out you would be if you were a spider flying around in the jet stream? And a lot of other things as well. So it's just an indication that things can survive up there. Things get up into the jet stream pretty regularly. It's pretty rare that they actually land in Hawaii, but you can imagine over these timescales that we're talking about, millions and millions of years, they tend to accumulate and make our flora. Right? So that's the story of ferns, but not everything has the same dispersal strategy. Flowering plants, these are more derived plants that actually produce flowers. That rate of endemism is actually much higher. So about 88% of all of our native plants here in Hawaii are only found in Hawaii. Only 10% are also found elsewhere. We have close to 1,000 species of flowering plants in Hawaii, and all of those derived from only about 300 original founders or original immigrants. So only 300 plants, the entire history of Hawaii that we know of have actually landed in Hawaii and survived to make a reproducing naturalized population. Those things evolved into a number of different species, so we have about 1,000 now. But over the whole course of about 6 million years in our main Hawaiian islands, only 300 things have actually gotten here, established, and survived to reproduce. So that's pretty astounding. How do flowering plants get here? Some of them get here in the wind. We talked about that. A lot of others get here via flotation. So a lot of the things that we find on the beach, you'll notice, have these very succulent body forms that are buoyant. Some of them can withstand salt water. Scaevola is something that we're going to look at in a little bit. This is a plant where people have done studies can survive over a year floating in salt water. You can float it in salt water, take it out of that salt water, plant it in the ground, and it'll germinate and produce a plant for you. It's got a real tough outer coating, and it's a very corky interior. So these things are just made from flotation. Not if they float so well, you also find these in Tahiti. You also find these in the coast of California and the coast of Florida, all over the place. These things get around pretty well. They have no trouble spreading. About 20% of Hawaii's plants arrive by flotation or rafting. We count the entire flora. And again, a lot of these things are beach plants. Now, I showed a picture of the coconut here. I don't remember why I chose to show a picture of the coconut, because this is a good example of something that floats really well and disperses. How do you think the coconut got here to Hawaii?
Floating in the ocean.
What was that?
Floating in the ocean.
Well, you would think it got here by floating in the ocean, right? It's clearly built for flotation. It floats really well. You guys have all found these washed up on the beach. It's got a great endosperm. This can survive 2 years floating in salt water and still germinate when it lands.
Yeah, it's a canoe plant.
Yeah, but it was actually brought here. So evidence that we have from genetics of both the coconut and coconut crabs that tend to follow them around wherever they go points to the fact that these were brought here from Tahiti by voyaging Hawaiians. So even though these things are probably the best example, sort of the archetype for something that's dispersed via flotation, it never made it to Hawaii. And this is a great example, now I remember why I gave this slide, of how isolated we really are here in Hawaii. We are in the middle of nowhere. We're so far away that coconuts didn't even find their way to Hawaii. So things landing here and establishing here are really, really rare events. We're going to learn in a couple of lectures when we talk about the ocean that Hawaii is in the middle of a gyre. A gyre is just a whirlpool of water that flows around us, down to the south, up and around us like that. There's another gyre in the south. There's an equator up here, and then there are a bunch of swirls around Alaska. Things don't make it into the middle of the gyre very often. If you end up in the ocean, you're going to be on this treadmill for a long, long time. And it takes a really freak event to get you out of that gyre to get us into Hawaii. Occasionally, like once every few thousand years, a storm will blow something from the south up into the north. But for the most part, things that are floating around in the south stay in the south, and things that are floating around in the north stay in the south. And it's much likelier, based on these currents, that you would have a dispersal event from Japan to California than you would find a dispersal event from Japan to Hawaii, just based on these currents. After Fukushima, there was way more debris that washed up on the coast of Oregon and the coast of California than washed up in Hawaii, just based on these currents. So we're pretty well isolated. So flotation is sort of an occasional thing that doesn't happen very often, about 20% of our flora. Another way that things come out here is via bird dispersal. And there's a few birds that will migrate from Hawaii to somewhere else. There's not very many. One of our good examples is the kolea, or the golden plover. You can see these on campus. How many of you have noticed the kolea wandering around campus? Okay, well now you can look for it and you'll see it. It hangs out in Kapiolani Park too. And it's an amazing bird. I don't even really like birds, and I still think this is an amazing bird. This one migrates all the way from Alaska to Japan, and some of them stop in Hawaii along the way. It's about a 2 or 3 day flight from Alaska to Hawaii. They just get up in the air and they cruise. They land here to wait out the winter, so they don't get frozen in Alaska where there's nothing to eat. And they're pretty omnivorous. They eat invertebrates, so they'll eat insects. They eat some seeds. They'll come over, and maybe every once in a while on a blue moon, they'll eat some seed in Alaska. It'll be making its way slowly down its digestive tract. It'll make it here after about, at this point. The next day, it'll be down here. Finally, it gets to Hawaii 2 or 3 days later, and it's ready to poop. It squats and it poops, and lo and behold, you have an event where something has migrated from Alaska to Hawaii. Not that many things have gotten here that way, but it happens. A nice adaptation of the kolea is that it likes to swallow things whole. It doesn't have teeth, right? So it doesn't chew up its seeds. If it finds a seed, it'll swallow it whole. So it sort of increases the likelihood that it could poop something in Hawaii and create a plant. Some of these things are swallowed, and some of our flora was probably ingested by a bird and pooped out, and that's how we have our Hawaiian raspberries. Very nice. Vaccinium, our hello berries, or our Hawaiian blueberries, probably got here the same way. These were probably evidence of things that were swallowed by birds, migrating birds, and then deposited in Hawaii. And about 50% of the things that that got to Hawaii, we think probably are due to being ingested by birds. Birds also transport things another way. They have dirty feet. They don't take a lot of baths. A lot of our wetland birds hang out in mud, in muddy areas. So they have muddy feet where things stick to their feet. They fly to Hawaii and bring plants with them that way. So even if they're not eating these pretty wooden, not nutritious Biden seeds, these are dandelions, native dandelion, they probably got stuck to their feathers or got stuck to their feet via mud and got transported that way. So they weren't ingested, but they hitchhiked on these birds. Scientists say that about 20% of our flying plants attach to the feet or the feathers of birds, and probably about 10% of those arrived on muddy-feeted birds. So they think the other 20% probably arrived, have adaptations that make them sticky, so they'll stick to birds. The other things were just really lucky that they happened to land in a muddy spot on a bird's home. So that's our plants. If you look at the rest of our flora, you can see that the rates of endemism are even higher than those of our plants, right? About 98% of our insects, of which we have over 5,000, are endemic. These 5,000 insects are derived from only 434 some odd original founders, right? So there has been an explosion of evolution and of novel species arising from only a few original founders. That's astounding. Birds, very, very high rates of endemism. The only ones that aren't endemic are really our migrating birds, and there's not very many of those. And the perfect number is really mammals, where we have 100% rates of endemism of our endemic mammals. Can anybody tell me what the endemic mammal is?
Hoary bat.
The hoary bat. Yeah, so we have a bat that's endemic. One bat that came here, evolved, and stayed. And it's got no friends. So any other mammals that you see, the pigs, the rats, obviously those are all the wallabies. Those are all introduced. None of those made it here on their own. They're all human assisted. We're going to talk about monk seals in a couple of lectures. That's also a mammal. That's also I can't remember. Is it native or endemic, Dr. Hunter? The monk seal. Endemic. It's endemic, but it's a marine mammal, so it's not on this list. But we could add that to this list too, and we could have 100%. This number would be 2. These numbers are astounding. So these are some of the highest rates of endemism on Earth. And this goes in every single grant proposal that I write. These rates of endemism are really important. They're important because it means there's a lot of things to discover. So if you discover a new species here, it means it probably only occurs here. And it's also important because it means that it's really in danger of going extinct. If you survive on, the left half of one valley, on one island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, one landslide can really put you out of business and make you go extinct. And this is also the reason why Hawaii is the extinction capital of the universe, because our rates of endemism are so high. There's no resilience. There's no reason. Okay. So another thing that's important about our flora and fauna, sort of the makeup of what lives here in Hawaii, is a concept that's known as biotic disharmony. This is a term that just means a non-random representation of biota among natural colonists of oceanic islands as compared with mainland systems. So species that are more dispersive will have a higher representation in the biota. So if you look at California, and you find that they have 50% ferns, 25% sunflower family, and 25% blackberry family. If we had perfect harmony in our biota, you would expect those exact same proportions to make it to Hawaii. You'd expect things just disperse at regular rates, they survive at regular rates, and we have pretty good ratios that compare with mainland populations. That's not the way that it works here in Hawaii. Our biota is very disharmonic with both Asian and North American populations. This is for several reasons. One reason is that those things on continents evolved with each other, so they compete with each other really well. They have defenses against their own pathogens that have co-evolved over millennia, millions of years. And so that's why they have those ratios. In Hawaii, when we had this bare lava island in the middle of nowhere, the things that got here were not random. They were things that dispersed well. They tended to be things that were associated with birds, because that was our greatest means of dispersal, or things that had good flotation or could get up in the air. And that's a very, very small percentage of mainland plants that have those dispersal mechanisms. Secondarily, they had to meet a suite of criteria once they actually got here in order to survive. They had to be able to withstand our climate. They had to be able to reproduce, probably with themselves, if they got here and they were the original founders. And they had to be able to sustain themselves in new and unusual environments. So our populations and our biota is disharmonic with mainland populations. The other big mechanism for plants making their way to Hawaii were so-called canoe plants. These aren't plants that were used to make canoes, although some of those were also canoe plants. These were plants that were put on Polynesian voyaging canoes by the very first voyagers who populated the Hawaiian Islands. They knew what they were doing. We're going to learn quite a bit about these explorers and the things that they brought with them. On the whole, they introduced a number of food plants, a number of plants that are used for construction of canoes and for houses, some medicine plants, and also some animals as well. These things that are canoe plants, when we talk about natural history of Hawaiian Island, they're sort of in their own category. We don't call them native because they didn't make it here on their own, but we don't call them modern introductions either because they are sort of in this gray area between being native and being introduced. We just put them in their own category and we call them canoe plants. And a lot of these are common to other Polynesian islands as well, such as Tahiti, and even some that are found as far south as New Zealand are shared with Hawaiian canoe plants. So, once these plants got here, they had a pretty tall task ahead of them, right? If you managed to disperse here, which in the entire 6 million year history of the main Hawaiian Islands, fewer than 300 plants were actually able to disperse here and establish. They had to figure out a way to satisfy both their immediate requirements as well as their long-term requirements. You can think of immediate as survival, long-term as actually evolving and establishing yourself and naturalizing yourself in a new environment. The immediate requirements is that you have to find a suitable mate. You can get here in a bird. You can be a male flower, looking all around to try to pollinate a female and keep your species going. But if there's no female to mate with, you're a dead end. And we have no idea how many plants actually got here, germinated, survived, and then didn't establish because they didn't have a mate. For this reason, we have an overrepresentation in our flora of flowers that have both male and female parts and that are compatible with themselves. You can't outcross. If you can't mate with somebody else, you can at least mate with yourself, right? You can't be with the one you love the one you're with. And a lot of our plants do that. A higher proportion do that than you would expect. You also have to meet your nutrient and food source, right? So if you're specialized to grow on, a very high phosphorus soil, or if you're specialized to grow on, some very weird nutrient that you only find in select locations in the Gobi Desert, you're not going to do well here in Hawaii, where most of our substrate is very, very nutrient poor, very inorganic, and for the most part is barren lava, right? Only a handful of plants can actually do that. In the long term, you have to make sure that your pollinator is here. So if you have a specialized insect or bird pollinator, and that pollinator didn't come here at the exact same time as you, even if your suitable mate is here with you, if you can't transfer your pollen to that mate, you're lot of requirements for seed germination. A lot of that has to do with microbial cues. So if your microbial partners aren't here, you might be SOL. And you also have to have pretty good defense against the predators and the pathogens that would be present here at Hawaii. That would be new, that would be unexpected. So a pretty tall order. This applies for all the things that may be here, not just the plants. And this is one of those reasons why so few things were able to establish. Okay, so that's how things got here. Let's talk about the things that actually made it and what they look like. There's two real main factors that determine what plants grow where in Hawaii. The first one is temperature, which is a factor of elevation. So as you go up in elevation, this is meter scale, it gets colder, obviously. So that's a big determinant. No matter where you are, if you're a Hawaiian plant, if you're an Alaskan plant, or a California plant, your cold tolerance is a big determinant of how far north you can grow or how high elevation you can grow. That's one limitation. The other limitation is your drought tolerance or your moisture tolerance. So how wet you are and how cold you are really the most important factors that will determine where you can establish. Other things like nutrients are sort of important, but if you're not growing in the right temperature and the right moisture, you're not going to establish. You guys all know, from having been in Hawaii for a long enough time, that the west side of our islands are dry and the east side of our islands are wet, right? We're going to talk more about how this interacts with trade winds in a couple of lectures, but that's true across all of the islands. You go to any island, the southwest corner will be really hot and dry. The northeast corner will be lush and wet, right? For that reason, you find much different communities on the windward sides than you do on the leeward sides. Just think about Waianae versus Ka'aava, right, or Kailua. One of those is very green, very lush. One of those is very dry and very hot. And that all has to do with the trade winds, which brings moisture to the east side and dry, hot environments to the west side. Yes, sir?
What's this method forest that I see in the bottom middle?
Excuse me?
What's that?
Music forest? We'll talk about those in a second. I'm getting there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a very quick whirlwind tour of Hawaiian environments, and we're going to start from the bottom and work our way up. And I'll show you a few of these example plants. So the first basic type of environment is the coastal strand. This is our beaches, right? So strand vegetation, you can call it beach vegetation. It's not just on sand, it also includes some of the rocks that are near the edge. And it's really constrained by salt spray and sort of hot, dry weather. So all of these plants that live in this coastal area have some tolerance for salt water. They can withstand salt water, which is pretty remarkable. Aside from coconuts, there's no real trees that grow on this coastal strand environment. A handful that can survive, but most of them are pretty low phosphate trees. This is a real great example of a coastal strand environment. These are things that tend to be native but not endemic. Almost all of these things are water dispersed. They can float really well. They can withstand salt water. They get around often enough that they tend to be native but not endemic. Some examples here, we have the beach morning glory. A lot of you have probably seen this. This is very pretty. Again, it's native, but it's not endemic. There's a few close relatives in this family. This is the sweet potato family. This is the most common one. This is biochemically really active. The seeds actually contain some alkaloids that are similar to LSD. I wouldn't recommend trying it out, but they have that biochemistry in them. Their leaves can actually be an antidote to jellyfish sting too. If you have vinegar, that's probably preferable, but if you're really in a bind, you can crush up some of these leaves and treat a jellyfish sting. How many of you guys have been stung by jellyfish? How many of you guys use this? Okay. Now you know. Knowing is half the battle. Also, we find a real common plant here, which is the naupaka. Right? This is Scivula toccata, although the name changes. Who's a botanist? What's the Took me a long time to find examples that actually had flowers on them, but I did it for you guys.
So is this like another one of those coastal beach plants?
Yes, this is another coastal strand plant. You'll see some of them have fruits, and you'll see those fruits are very corky. So they float really well. They have sort of a protective covering. But what's sort of neat is that it has this half flower. This is also pretty useful if you like to snorkel. You can rip off the leaf and spread it on the inside of your mask, and it works as an anti-fogger. So if you don't like hocking loogies into your mask, you can just use this leaf instead. It really works pretty well. How many of you guys do that? This half flower is interesting. So there's a beach naupaka, and then there's 4 or 5 mountain naupacas as well that grow up higher elevation that are related to the beach naupaka and have the same flower morphology, but actually are due to different immigrations. So this wasn't a single radiation. These were different plants that arrived at different times and survived in Hawaii. There's a lot of different legends about the shape of this flower, and from all around the world, right? Because this flower gets around. I'll tell one. That's one of many different versions of the story, and you can tell me your favorite if you have one. But it said that there was 2 lovers once upon a time that were very, very devoted to each other. They loved each other, and they came to the attention of the goddess Pele because Pele thought that the man of this duo was pretty foxy. She really liked him a lot. She super liked him. So she got jealous of this couple and tried to woo the man away. So she changed herself into a different form that she thought this man would find desirable. She sort of like shimmied her hips and tried to get his attention, but he only had eyes for his lover. He didn't want to be involved with Pele. Finally, Pele chased this young man into the mountains and threw molten lava at him. And she got pretty mad. So the sisters, Pele witnessed this, and to save the young man from certain death, because she was throwing hot lava at him, they stepped in and changed the young lover into the beach naupaka. And they changed the woman of this duo into the mountain naupaka. Right? And so it's said if you ever reunite sort of the 2 halves of that flower, the half of the flower from the beach naupaka and the half of the flower from the mountain naupaka, and make a whole flower, that you'll reunite these lovers, and that they'll turn back into the people that they once were, and they'll be together again. Pretty sweet story, right? Again, there's a lot of different versions. I'm just going to show you, to break up the lecture a bit, I'll show you a little 2-minute cartoon about this book. up a little bit from the beach, just out of the salt spray zone, but not very high in elevation, but still low and hot. We end up in the leeward savanna. So this would be on the west side of the island, the leeward side. These are hot, grassy areas. And these are almost all gone. A lot of these have been converted to cattle ranches over the years or to homes, right? But you can still find these habitats, especially on Big Island. There's some nice leeward savannas. On Maui, also, you can find some of these habitats. We have a lot of native grasses. One of the real common ones is peely grass. Peely has this nice characteristic of sort of wrapping around itself, so you can roll it in your hands and make it clump together. And for that reason, it's used in traditional Hawaiian hollies too. You find in grass shacks. They tend to be made out of peely grass. Back before the introduction of rats in this same leeward savanna, we probably would have found big forests full of palm trees. So this was a good habitat for some of our endemic palms that grew all over the leeward side of Hawaii's islands. These got decimated very, very quickly after Polynesian rats were introduced. When we do our section on archaeology, we can learn more about how fast that was and how quickly that changed this habitat. Okay, so we did our coastal strand, and we did our leeward savanna. So let's go up in elevation a little bit on this side. We're going to talk about our dryland forests, our leeward dry forests. Again, these are very hot and dry. This is another habitat that's really hard to find. There's a few spots on Big Island and on Maui where you still find these types of forests. They tend to be similar to the savannas, so there's a lot of grass and they're sort of interspersed with the occasional tree. You might know what this tree is? Yeah, it's the Willy Willy. Did you have a question?
So would this be like out by Kapolei and Eba?
It would have been back in the day before those got so developed. Eba's a little bit flat, but if you go up towards like Makakilo, thank you. Yeah, Makakilo would have been, and if you do actually still find the occasional Willy Willy tree in Makakilo scattered around. This is such a cool plant. These huge gnarled legume trees that have beautiful, beautiful red flowers, bright red seeds that used to be strung into lay. These used to be pretty common trees. In 2005, an invasive gall wasp came, and this wasp would lay its eggs inside the tree, and it made the tree very sick. It essentially strangled the vascular tissue of the trees and started killing them off. So within about 3 years, almost all the Willy Willy trees in the entire state were pretty close to going extinct. In 2008, they introduced a second wasp that parasitized the first gall wasp that was attacking the Willy Willy. So this parasitic wasp would lay its eggs in that parasitic wasp and kill it. Some of the Willy Willy trees recovered. It was a really one of our few examples of successful biocontrol, where we introduce a species to take out another species. So there is actually still some hope for these Willy Willy trees. The ones that are surviving are now starting to reproduce. So it's been pretty successful. So let's go up on the other side from the island, from the coastal strand. This is our windward side. We have our Hawaiian rainforest. So these are pretty low elevation, up to about 2,000 meters or 6,000 feet or so. You guys know these. This is great. If you go hiking around Kailua, you'll find tree ferns, ohia trees, koa trees. A lot of our species, a lot of our diversity is found within these rainforests. This is just an example of what these tree ferns look like. I won't talk about feral pigs right now. Okay. Going up from there, at this point, this is where the trade winds really start affecting rainfall. Once you get up above about 6,000 feet, then the trade winds no longer affect the weather in quite the same way. So you find similar forest types and similar habitats in both the leeward and the windward side. Subalpine Mamani forest you only find in our higher islands. So this is really just Big Island and Hawaii where these types of forests exist. And we're up above the rainforest now, so the ohia trees can't survive there, the koa trees can't survive. Instead we find these Mamani trees. These produce to survive. Cold weather, these get frost pretty frequently. High UV radiation. And that's why our silver swords have those nice silvery leaves. It reflects a lot of the UV radiation and protects them from the sunshine. We'll learn a bit more about silver swords in a couple of lectures. The last group that I want to talk about is this music forest. And we find this sort of both, it's not quite a rainforest and it's not quite a dry forest, so it's not that wet and it's not that dry. It's really an intermediate forest type. And this is a pretty common forest type. So if you go up on like the Waianaes to Mount Paala, that sort of area, you find a lot of our music forests. These are really nice. These are dominated by both ohia and koa trees. This is an example of a koa tree. It has dimorphic leaves. So this is its true leaves, form these little compound leaves. And when you see a mature koa tree, it forms these sickle-shaped phyllodes. These are actually modified stems. Those aren't true leaves, even though they function like leaves. Koa, of course, has a lot of uses, both for making fancy furniture, for making canoes. These are the biggest trees, so these would have been used for war canoes. And now we use them for things like ukulele and guitars. So that was our whirlwind tour of the terrestrial areas of the Hawaiian Islands. I touched upon a lot of things today in this lecture, so I just want to go over the main points. First of all, we really owe our rare and unusual biota to our isolation, first and foremost. We're in the middle of the Pacific, so far away. And because of that, most of the things that we find here are endemic. Colonization happened really infrequently enough that once things established here, they were almost immediately reproductively isolated and were allowed to evolve into new and unusual things. Bird dispersal was probably the most important for forming our flora, our plants life here in Hawaii. Our plant composition differs from mainland populations. We say it's disharmonious. Yeah, dispersal was really only the first step to establish it. You still had to come up with a survival strategy to mate and to acquire your nutrients. Our Hawaiian vegetation zones are almost completely parameterized by temperature and elevation and by moisture. Those two factors